stories that fill our minds and hearts are actually just as important as our food.
What does that mean? Please tell us in the context of leadership.
They're very often connected and there's an overlap. There's actually two modes that are possible. And in one mode, we entertain people. And in the other mode, we kind of influence or manage or lead people.
My name is Dr. James McCabe. I'm a corporate storyteller, and I've been involved in this line of work for about 2 decades. And I've realized over time that all challenges are challenges of communication.
Leadership story is very much, I think, part of the hero's journey. So rhetoric is the classic traditional language of management. It's the language of leadership.
What are the secret principles at work behind all good stories that you have come across?
Stop using the same language, stop using the same acronyms. Do not say the thing that your audience expects you to say, because they're not going to even hear that. They're not going to even remember it. When people say, we want to be like Uber or Apple or Tesla, the Netflix of something. You have to get rid of that copycat thinking, where I'm just trying to replicate the leader or the biggest winner.
Hey, thank you so much, James. Such a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be on the podcast, The Ex-Monk's Ride.
No, it's my pleasure, Gaurav. My pleasure.
Thank you. This podcast is really special because for a long time, I've been interacting with people who are at C-suite level or people who are operating at C-suite -1. And one of those common challenges and the fascinating area that they have shown their interest in is storytelling. And as much as people would want to become storytellers, yet they have this misconception that storytelling cannot be used in the context of leadership. It cannot be used in the context of business. Now, before we dwell into all these important ingredients, these facets of storytelling, would love to hear from you, James. You call yourself the storytelling doctor, the story doctor. One, when did you develop your interest in storytelling? Second, from where did you coin this term, the story doctor? Who coined this term for you?
Well, I'll answer the second question first, Kara.
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I did not create that expression. So this is a phrase that was used by a German manager, I think in Mark in 2015 in Darmstadt, introducing me to his team. And I was just struck by it because, you know, I'm always interested. I mean, storytelling is interpreting the world through the eyes and ears of your customers. So it's customer centric as opposed to rhetoric, which is kind of whatever you want to say to an audience. So I do listen carefully to my clients. And I just thought it was an interesting phrase. It's not really correct English, because there is no such thing as a story. There's a script doctor in the film industry, which is like a story consultant in Hollywood. Sometimes they're called script doctors. And there's a storyteller or story consultant. But okay, I am a doctor as well, not a medical doctor, but a literary doctor. So I decided, well, that's an interesting phrase or handle, and I'll use that slightly playfully. I don't take it overly seriously. The idea that your narrative or your story is as important as your health, and that you can boost it or transform it. And it's back to the whole idea as well of art and culture as being redemptive and not just decorative. And that's a huge part of what I believe in, that like the stories that fill our minds and hearts are actually just as important as our food or our wealth or things that we consider to be more central to survival. Yeah. And the other question was, how long was I involved in storytelling and when did I get into it? I suppose, quote unquote, professionalized it in about 2008. So it's just slightly a year or two before the kind of big trend for business storytelling. But in fact, of course, I've been kind of practicing it all my life. And Ireland is one of the great storytelling cultures, as indeed is India. And all cultures are narrative in their essence, but some of them are very strongly emphasized or pronounced, and they include Iceland or Arabia and Russia, and obviously India and China. That was all part of my background in the culture that I grew up in, and I studied literature in university and took it all the way to in Oxford. I was lucky enough. I was always engaged in reading and writing, and I was just talking to my wife the other day about a Christmas present my mother bought me in 1974, and I'm like 8 years old, and it's just like a huge illustrated history of the world. I mean, how did she even know? She had 6 children. History is just a larger kind of more official form of dramatic narrative.
Precisely. And I love the way you defined storytelling when you said that it's interpreting the world through the eyes of your customers. And in between, a story doctor, you use the term rhetoric. And in fact, during our last conversation as well, of all the conversations that we have had, James, you have emphasized on importance of understanding that rhetoric and dramatic narrative, they are different.
Yeah.
And it's very important for a business leader to understand that, because persuasion is different from involvement. What does that mean? Please tell us in the context of leadership and the context of business that we are looking at storytelling in.
Yeah, I think that this is the core distinction for people, especially anybody involved in organized public life or in business or commerce, has to see that these are 2 separate things. Now, they're very often connected and there's an overlap, but they are 2 completely separate disciplines. So whatever language it is that you speak, whether that's English or Hindi or Japanese, there's actually 2 modes that are possible. And in one mode, we entertain people, and in the other mode, we kind of influence or manage or lead people. So rhetoric is the classic traditional language of management. It's the language of leadership. It's the language of executive life. And it's the art of persuasion. And anybody who has succeeded in any way in business has had to be good at rhetoric. But the problem is nowadays that we don't often get the opportunity to deliver a complete speech over 20 minutes, or nobody wants us to have slide decks with 50 slides in them, and that we've been sort of distracted and fragmented as audiences. And it's quite difficult to get the attention, what I call the undivided attention of a captive audience is simply a thing of the past. So I think that people that practice rhetoric are having a harder and harder time. And we've seen it even in things like the news media and in politics as well, that over the years, it's become a little bit more provocative or a bit more soundbitey. It's kind of almost trying to exaggerate in order to get people's attention. So storytelling, or drama or narrative, these are words that have to do with involvement, that have to do with not necessarily agreeing with the other person, but feeling connected to the other person. So we don't always agree with our friends or our family members, but we're bonded with them at a much deeper level. However, there are maybe political leaders or business leaders that we agree with, but don't follow. So what's that all about? We can be intellectually persuaded of something and still not change our behavior. And that's
absolutely,
because behavior is a much deeper level, and it's tribal. It has to do with what my peers are doing, what we do as a group. And it's very difficult to change cultures. You can think that cultures change very quickly with technology, but when you look at actual human behavior, particularly if you read literary texts from hundreds of years ago in different cultures, and you see these cultures don't change at all, that we have on the surface a feeling of very rapid technological advance, but like underneath it, human nature, how much has human nature changed in the last 5,000 years? Probably very little, really. I was fascinated that the word culture shock was first used in 1951. And the reason is because the world wars stopped, and people, instead of killing each other, started working with each other and traveling into other people's countries and tourism. And that's when you get the idea that, oh, other cultures exist. So I think the storyteller has to tune into the audience and to really dramatize the life of other people, like William Shakespeare did. Shakespeare didn't write any plays about himself. We know nothing about William Shakespeare. He's the ultimate storyteller.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he also didn't invent any stories. He wrote 36 or 7 plays, but only one of them is original, The Tempest, the last one. So you use whatever material is available and you recreate it or reinvent it in your own way.
Yeah. In the context of business and leadership, as you mentioned, that it's becoming very important to have those narrative, because those narratives can entertain people, that can be more conversational in nature, where the storytelling, the drama can come in the play. You also spoke about that how behavior change is not that easy. It takes a lot of time. Now, how would you combine the storytelling part of it, the narrative part of it, and changing the behavior in the context of culture that we are living in? Because as a leader, it's very important to impact the culture, and who you are impacts the culture. So how would you bring all of these together?
Well, there's a kind of a rhetorical way of doing that, and there's a dramatic way of doing it. And the rhetorical way is that the leader acts as a model. So the leader demonstrates what they want other people to do. So the leader is your teacher. Okay, it's kind of like the guru approach. So I want to emulate my guru. Okay, and that's fine if it works. The problem is that nowadays we don't have the ability to get everybody for a long period of time in a room to start modeling this behavior. The other way, the dramatic way, the storytelling way, is to all learn together. So you move away from answers to questions, and you don't provide answers or as a leader. What you do is you help your audience ask much bigger, much better questions of themselves. So your leadership style becomes exploratory. It's not ruling, it's not demonstrating, or it's not didactic. It's much more dramatic in the sense of being open-ended.
Yeah, as you use the word exploratory in nature.
The crucial task behind succeeding with change of any kind is psychological ownership. So the audience must own the change. It's no good simply replicating something or following something or being compliant, because that's completely superficial. And I think the problem is, for a lot of business cultures, there's been so much change so rapidly that people generally just kind of tick the boxes and go through the motion, but they almost detach or disconnect. We have seen a kind of what do they call it? Quiet quitting? Is that what it's called? Quiet quitting? Where they're turning up, but they're just punching the card.
James, and so much in alignment with what you're talking about, because I personally believe that a leader has to have an exploratory approach to leadership. Gone are the days where you can just command and tell people what has to be done. We have to create a very safe space where people can get into a deeper radical inquiry within. So how can storytelling be effectively employed to convey those complex ideas or vision to stakeholders, investors, or the wider industry that a leader is engaging with?
Well, yeah, I think it's a very good question. What you just asked relates also to what I call narrative strategy. So narrative strategy means how do I navigate a process of change? And ultimately, how do I narrate new forms of value that maybe have not been identified by other people, by my employees or my investors or my customers? And the way you do this is you basically plot out where your audience is right now and where you would like to bring them or take them, okay? Except you're not going to take them. They're going to take themselves there, okay? So you basically start with an accurate, realistic assessment of the current environment, which isn't optimistic, but sober and realistic, okay? In other words, you're not going to describe your organization as being highly innovative if in fact it's not. Okay, for example, whenever anybody makes a mistake in your organization, they are punished. Okay, that's not an innovative organization. Okay, so they don't have what people nowadays call psychological safety. So psychological safety is like, I'm able to speak my mind. There's no kickback when I say something that I feel is true. So that's the first bit. And then to articulate the desired state. So what kind of organization, what kind of an enterprise are we talking about? This is usually, unfortunately, a copycat version of the best performing brand in my industry. So people, they take an iconic brand like Uber or Apple or Tesla, and they say, we want to be the Netflix of ... of electricity or something. You have to get rid of that copycat thinking, where I'm just trying to replicate the leader or the biggest winner. I'm trying to be that person. I'm trying to be the Sam Altman of ...
So and so industry.
That's sort of copycat thinking. So once you highlight the exact state, like let's say we're a traditional bank, okay? And we're an established bank with a market which is kind of eroding or being disrupted. Okay, that's your current state. And the future state is, we want to continue being a bank, but we want to evolve into a software platform that provides a lot of other services which might be related or parallel to banking, including insurance, healthcare. Okay, so you're going from an old style industrial entity into, you're developing a platform strategy. So a platform strategy means that we are a brand like Apple or Google that can be anything, anywhere. We are what we choose to be. The ultimate organization is, it's more like a kind of a culture and a brand and a strategy that you can bring with you into any market or industry, where your brand or your strategy is recognizable. And it's like, oh yeah, now they're making pilotless cars, okay? Or, oh yeah, now they're selling home insurance. So when you're a platform narrative, you can kind of go, you're not limited to anything. Now that's the ultimate. That's why those big platforms, big tech platforms have been so rewarded by everybody, by customers and investors. But those are very large ideas. And in order to narrate a very large idea, you need an exact definition of the emotional energy and where you want to bring people and what you want to provide in terms of basically the emotional recipe of your business. What that means is, instead of just having a list of values, like we believe in innovation and we believe in responsibility and we believe in nature and stuff. Now, usually the longer the list, the more lip service it is. And there's usually no connection between those words. Many of those words are just synonyms. The funny thing is, you have to have a kind of a universal deep niche, what I call a deep niche. And a deep niche is a quality or a feeling that's recognized. And the nation brands have done this in the past. I mean, Germany has done this with the Made in Germany, the thing that was connected with the economic miracle in the 50s and 60s. So whatever came out of Germany, we knew automatically was just quality. First of all, you just knew that. It wouldn't be the sexiest, it wouldn't be the cheapest, it wouldn't be the fastest, but you knew that the reliability,
the quality would not be compromised.
Yeah.
Yeah. One question is, since we are talking about storytelling, what you just mentioned is narrative is extremely important. And you use the word emotional energy and the emotional recipe. And of course, then you spoke about the importance of having the deep feeling and the universal deep niche. So the one question which is coming to me is, what are the secret principles at work behind all good stories that you have come across?
Okay. I think that there's one or two ultimate ingredients, just like you have flour and eggs. What are the absolute basics here? Stop doing what other people are doing narratively. Okay, stop using the same language, stop using the same acronyms. And if you're in the generative AI business, stop using that phrase. Why? Because everyone else is doing the same things. So the very first principle is to keep it novel. Keep novel. Whatever you do, make sure it's new. Okay, it's a universal principle of all artistic, and it has to do with human attention spans. And our attention spans are very selective and very choosy, and we don't notice similarity, we only notice difference. As soon as there's a break in a pattern or an aberration or something that's different or wrong or missing, the human being notices that. So we only notice change. We never notice uniformity. So stop being uniform. Okay, it's the very first principle. Do not say the thing that your audience expects you to say, because they're not going to even hear that. They're not going to even remember it. They're only going to remember the thing that they didn't expect you were going to say. Okay, so that's the ultimate principle, is novel. Novelty. It's why in English we call these books novels, because they should be new. The second principle after that is contrast. And contrast has to do with the nature of knowledge and how we only know we're alive when we're about to die, and how human beings only comprehend experience through contrast. It's the only way we know what rich means, because we've experienced poor. It's the only way we know what black is, because we've seen the color white. So in other words, the human mind is a very complex, sophisticated thing, but it is so overwhelmed with information and impressions the whole time. It only notices differences. It's a very differentiating type of mechanism. And secondly, if you want people to immerse themselves and to internalize an experience, you must provide contrast. This is why you can't tell a kind of a Disney fairy tale. That's not business storytelling. It cannot be a pipe dream of just wonderful promises, because there's no contrast and there's no truth value. So truth value means squaring with people and showing people the other side. So people relate to and connect with differences. This is what gets people's attention. And when those differences are contrasting, then they start getting involved with the content. Okay? Especially when there are patterns of contrast that they cannot predict. Okay, so that's when they want to stay till the end. They want to finish the book because there's something that's driving them on. So
Beautiful.
those three principles, which are empathy, which means really not just understanding other people, but being the same as other people, just synchronizing with them, synchronizing with your audience, not trying to see your audience as targets, but actually you're synchronizing with them. That's the principle of empathy. Then there's the suspense of sustaining their curiosity, making them want to know more and more. Okay, so you can draw out the story for as long as you want. Okay, and then finally, rewarding their curiosity with surprise that creates a more lasting memory. Because we know that ever since the end of the 19th century, when the German sociologist Hermann Ebbinghaus created the Forgetfulness Curve, and he just showed how 60% of all information is lost within 4 hours. It's just like it's nothing. Even if you have the ability to communicate and to persuade people, they're going to forget you anyway, really quickly. And the forgetfulness curve is like a reality check. It's like, how are we going to twist the story in such a way that it's like a joke that you remember and want to tell the next person?
Yeah.
Those, rhythmic patterns of empathy, suspense, and surprise are the ones that we try and look for and try to design into the story that we tell.
Yeah, this is pure gold, James, and you know this, right? When you spoke about that, keep it novel, because people don't remember similarities, people remember differences. The second one you spoke about is the contrast one. People remember white because they've encountered with black. And you use the way we have to comprehend experiences is only when we understand what is on the other side. And that's the easiest way to involve people. So empathy, suspense, and surprise. That's how we reward people. Now, help me understand, as much as I understand this at the cognitive level, what do you think? How can a leader imbibe in these principles in their day-to-day life? What is it that they need to learn? And what is it that they need to unlearn to be a better storyteller in the context of business?
I think it's a very interesting question, because we're talking about leadership, which is a particular focus. And the leadership scenario is a bit more complex because the leader needs their own narrative to sustain their own evolution.
Precisely.
And then secondly, they also need a story for other people. So and those stories are obviously connected, but they're not identical. So if you want to think about a leadership story, or what I call like a lead story, it's not to tell my employees what I had for breakfast. That's not a leadership story. So a leadership story is not, let's show me at home with the weekend with my pet dog so you can see I'm a human being. That's not a leadership story. That's the sort of Disneyfication again of CEOs and part of this overall almost hagiography of the world's greatest, you know, and Steve Jobs was the kind of like the like little household gods, right? That's
Yeah.
not leadership story. Leadership story is very much, I think, part of the hero's journey, which was plotted by Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
So Joseph Campbell, instead of the three words I'm using, which are empathy, suspense, surprise, Joseph Campbell comprehended the hero's journey in three words: descent, initiation, and return. And the question you've just asked me, Gaurav, is about how does a leader
Descent,
do that?
initiation, and return.
Descent means to analyze or to articulate the problem. Okay, this means to understand what is the threat or the risk or what's going wrong or what needs to be fixed or whatever. Okay. Initiation means the insight and the learning that comes from engaging with this dramatic problem. Okay, what needs to be applied. And return means how can the learning or the deep insight now be brought back to your tribe and handed over to other people so other people can engage what you've seen or what you know now to work. So there were three parts of the lead story, right? The first part is to define the fall from grace. Yeah, for example, let's say it's a very successful company. Okay, a lot of brands in Germany historically have been ultra successful, like BMW, a very, very successful brand. It's hard for brands like that to tell great stories if they don't understand what the threats are, okay, because they're so successful. So dissent might be underutilized potential. Yeah, maybe you are a big shot and a big success, but maybe you've never achieved anything like your true potential. Maybe your big success, in fact, is just 5% of everything that could have been possible. Okay. So, for example, your dissent might be a lost opportunity. Okay. So instead of sitting on your laurels and saying to everybody how great we are, maybe, you know, we're great, but like we could have been so much greater. Okay. So this is the way that you get people's attention at the beginning, by understanding the gap between reality and possibility. That's where you start to get people's focus their attention as a leader. Without airbrushing it and without fairy tailing it, this has to be a sort of, you know, realistic assessment of what's gone wrong or what's not been realized. Initiation is the bit that a lot of leaders get. And I think that they understand that, whether that's a new strategy or a new technology or something, maybe it's a cultural change, or maybe they're sort of going global or something, and they realize this is now what we have to do. We were analog and now we have to be digital. Okay, so we were a product company, now we have to be a service company or an experience company. So initiation usually means, what is the nature of the change? Once we start confronting and dealing with the issues that we're faced with, who do we need to be now? Who do we now need to become in order to succeed? Okay, what type of people succeed now in this situation? Okay, so we were one type of company, but maybe now we need to become another type of company. So most leaders are too busy motivating in order to be realistic in the dissent. They are not honest enough, and they're not realistic and truthful enough in talking about problems or achievements which have not been fully realized. Okay. Most leaders are very good at this bit, the middle bit, which is the initiation.
The initiation one.
Yeah. That's the one that they're kind of, you know, what needs to be learned. Okay, so we were a car company and now we need to become a software company. This is the new thing. This is the initiation. We're called Volkswagen. Okay, so that's, you can see that. The return bit is where also a lot of leaders fall down, because return means, okay, so we've now looked at how we are changing successfully and what the next evolution is. Return means not showing not just showing or telling other people, this is what you know, just do like I do, not
Yeah.
teaching, but handing over and transferring and kind of, it's like giving people, yeah, the space or the opportunity, but how do I ensure that my audience is not simply inspired or motivated? I want a deeper thing. I want them to psychologically take away everything that I'm saying and make it their own. How do I get the audience to make the story their own? And that's what Joseph Campbell meant by return. Okay. Return means fully integrated. Okay. So I didn't just hear, and it's an interesting, it's, you know, it's a kind of an inspiring story, but, you know, it hasn't impacted me in the slightest. I haven't changed. So how do I sort of take that inside, internalize it, and express it in my own way? Yeah. And I think that that is the toughest part. I'll tell you why. Because the leader must trust, they must trust their audience and not have a kind of a school teacher or a parental attitude or a kind of a slightly because most leaders will fall into the trap of feeling that they have to model or demonstrate what they want to happen. And that's the old style.
Yeah. And in fact, that's where we started, James. We spoke about the difference between rhetoric and the narrative approach to storytelling. Now, it brings me to a question, James. One is, as you mentioned, that leaders operate from a space as if they believe that they have to model everything that they're talking about. What do you think are the other misconceptions leaders operate from that don't allow them to become the storytellers that can bring in behavior change?
They have a huge problem with empathy. And the reason is because the very first bit, it's what I call the oxytocin deficit. The oxytocin deficit, okay? They find it very difficult to talk about their own limits or flaws. And they find it objectionable sometimes to talk about anybody's limits or flaws. They can't square with people as to the human mortal limitations. And this is why we say empathy, because empathy is shared vulnerability, is my definition. Shared vulnerability. Okay. Because you can't look up to a leader. If you're looking up to a leader, you've got that sort of superior, inferior thing going on. You've got to look a leader in the eye, and they've got to be like you. Okay. Not perfect, because you're not perfect, you know? So I think there's a leader has to do a few things simultaneously. They must be able to differentiate between the dominant narrative and the emerging narrative. And too many leaders defend the dominant narrative because it's their current success. So I talk about the tragedy of success. Success leads to failure because success results in stagnation. Success results in the recipe stagnating. Okay, and people just endlessly milk, and this is we have this huge problem all over the world, and you have it in the oil and gas industry as well. Yeah, where we have this. What do we do? Do we just deconstruct that entire industry? Do we give it a chance? Do we have the new renewable stuff or whatever, the environmental stuff at the same time? How do we do this? And we've got people defending the dominant old narrative. Okay,
yeah, because that has worked in the past.
Yeah, so a leader's real job is to articulate the emerging narrative, not to defend the dominant existing established narrative, but to identify and articulate and be the champion of the emerging narrative, even when that's actually very threatening to the organization. Or, you know, it's realizing, oh, we used to be a bank, but in fact, our competition now is the tech players. We're not even competing with other banks. And that's an emerging narrative. We can't ignore it or defend ourselves against it. We have to explore this. We have to see where this goes.
I just love it that it's very important for a leader to be aware of the dominant narrative and invite people to be with the emerging narrative. And of course, you know, something that has worked in the past may not work in the future. However, it's quite natural for most of us to be over dependent on the dominant narrative that we have been living our life from. You also use the word oxytocin deficit. Tell me more about that.
Our bodies are just swirling bags of hormones.
Yeah.
I mean, the hormones are they are affecting what we're thinking and what we're feeling. And oxytocin, cortisol, and dopamine have an awful lot to do with storytelling. So when I use those words, empathy, suspense, surprise, it's a biological event. They're not just words or things that I'm feeling. My whole body is washed and marinated in these things. Yeah. And these become, I mean, cortisol is a kind of a stress hormone. It's a hormone that keeps me on edge. It's a hormone that's connected with suspense. Dopamine is a reward hormone. So it's a kind of a feel good chocolate type of hormone. And oxytocin, of course, is the bonding agent where I'm kind of like at a primal level connecting with other people. So these are the hormones that are kind of like in our bloodstream when we're experiencing or receiving stories. And the oxytocin is the most important one because that's the super glue. So today, for example, so it's also happening in companies as well, where young people are just jumping from one brand to another, and they have no loyalty or connection to those big names. They just want that on the CV. There's no real sticking power. People are falling away from organized religions or established political parties because the oxytocin deficit, you know, and divorce rates are going through the roof in the Western world as well because of the oxytocin deficit. So when oxytocin diminishes, my struggle starts to feel different to your struggle, and what I believe starts to feel different to what you believe. The opposite of oxytocin is like the power play, okay? Because there's kind of limited resources in the environment, and there's a kind of a fight for resources. And this is when we start to see political elections and things become antagonistic, you know, or when you start to see a price war in a certain part of the economy or an industry. It's the reverse of oxytocin.
When there is stress in the environment, the brain produces cortisol. What I'm also listening is that in the 3 principles of storytelling, of course, the cortisol would get produced, but this would get produced only after you have enough and more oxytocin to take care of that. So we cannot reverse the process. James, help me understand. Since we are talking about storytelling, and you just spoke about the importance of having empathy, surprise, and suspense, and how they relate to oxytocin, cortisol, as well as dopamine. What do you think? What are the emerging trends or advancements in storytelling techniques that leaders should be aware of so that a leader could be mindful of what kind of culture is being created or is he or she being a part of?
Biggies, you're asking biggies. I would say that if you look beyond all of the loud changes in our environment, and generative AI is just the latest version of digital transformation. What's behind everything is that power is shifting from the producers of value to the consumers of value. So this is why, in general, based on technology and analytics, consumers everywhere have more and more choice or more information, controlling some of the things that are happening to them and having more access to different applications and information and stuff. So what's happening is there's been an erosion of power from a kind of the dinosaur level. And now we've got the sort of the mammal age, where it's kind of like other people are enabled and empowered more with information and technology and insights and stuff. So that's one of the key. And this means that your audience is more important than it ever was before. It means that it's no good just giving a speech or sharing a power deck, you know, PowerPoint slide. If you don't create space and place and options for other people to feedback and connect. So for example, why do we park the questions and answers session at the very end of presentations? It's just crazy. You should always start with the question and answer session because that's the conversation piece. Do you know what I mean? So to assume that you cannot converse with me until you've heard what I have to say because it's somehow more important than what you have to say, or you don't know what I'm about to say, there's a kind of a power relationship there between teaching and learning. And I would always say to switch that around a little bit and to start with the questions yeah, which will also connect you to the audience. And the other bit that's very interesting, you know, because I end up working in a lot of projects with people's new technologies. I'm not a great believer in virtual reality. I don't see the whole point in it. And a few years ago, everyone was talking about the metaverse. Nobody talks about it anymore because we didn't understand what was the point. What is the point in removing yourself from your real world environment? It's pointless, okay? Unless you're just escaping, that's okay, but it's just entertaining. It's not to do with transforming your actual life. Augmented reality, on the other hand, where you're taking elements of digital technology and embedding them inside the real world is huge. And it's probably the cutting edge of storytelling. So we've had 7 ages of stories over the millennia. They're all still there, starting with poetry, drama, and fiction in various parts of the world. And then we've had cinema, radio, and television in the last 150 years. And then in the last 25 years, what we've had is the internet. So these are the 7 ages of storytelling. We're just halfway now between age 7 and age 8. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a new age of storytelling right now. And it's going to be called augmented reality. Okay, so that's beyond the internet. So the very first thing that will happen is that you'll start to see your windscreen in your car, your dashboard will disappear, and the guidance or safety data will start to appear on your windscreen. So the windscreen will become a screen through which you observe reality. There's huge breakthroughs. Now, in terms of narrative and storytelling, what does that mean? It means that each time you visit your favorite shop could be a totally different experience based on what happened before. And it means that the space around us will be animated with mini narratives. In education, you can see this is going to be a huge event in educational terms. And I've already worked with people that are, you know, in the holographic space. And you can see how holograms of world famous gurus are already kind of being in 2 places at once and stuff like that. So it's definitely the theater of the future will be augmented reality. And I think that will be a totally new canvas for all kinds of storytellers. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, James. You know, starting from poetry to drama to fiction to cinema, the radio, television, internet, and now the augmented reality is going to bring in new shades to humanity. James, thank you so much. James, last question. If you were to share quick 3 tips that could help leaders to become storytellers, and here's another invitation. Rather than looking at these leaders in the context of business only, how can I become a good storyteller so that I can become a better leader at home as well? I can become a better brother. I can become a better son. I can become a better friend and a better manager. Quick 3 tips.
It's a good question. It's a very good question. I would say the answer to that question is the film It's a Wonderful Life, where this character, James, the American actor, James Stewart, he's a banker under pressure and he'd like to kill himself at Christmas time. And because he's feeling about his own life the whole time, but he has this opportunity to reimagine his life as if he wasn't there without spoiling the story for you. So to be a storyteller is to pull the plug on your own ego completely. And whatever you're experiencing, imagine it not mattering at all. And instead of experiencing your life, you start tuning into the lives of people around you and what would their experience of themselves be like and of you. So if we start to think of the impact that we're having from other people's point of view, both in good and bad terms, that's a huge education, because most of us are being continuously trained to focus purely on our own issues, on my life, what's happening for me, my potential, my New Year's resolutions, my goals. And it's become a hyper individuated experience, which has actually resulted in explosive loneliness and disorientation, and an absolute removal of the human experience is not a solitary thing. You can choose solitude at any time,
Yeah.
but that's not the nature of the experience.
Yeah.
The nature of the experience is to see yourself through other people's eyes. And that's also at the core of all the world religions,
Yeah.
world religions. It's
Yeah.
at the core of that. It's understanding that the ego is essentially illusory in nature, that what you want is essentially an illusion. It's often a reflection of what other people want or have wanted.
Yeah.
And so to get out of your own way and to question yourself about the lives of other people.
Yeah.
I think that's the essence of it all. It's also, I think, the essence of becoming a better human being.
Better human being. Absolutely. James, thank you so much. I think that's a beautiful message, how I can pull my ego out, and rather than looking at my life through my own lens, it's time to look at the life of others and look at the kind of impact that you would have on their lives. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experiences. And I think we could not ask for more, as we are just celebrating the year 2024, the first leg of 2024. And it's a good reminder to ourselves that becoming a good storyteller can help us become better human beings.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.